Hello and welcome to the Green Living Festival, Naturescaping Day, Thursday, June 11th, one of 3 days of focus on ways to live greener. I am Jean Ponzi. I'm the Green Resources Manager from the Earthway Center at Missouri Botanical Garden. Green Living Festival is presented by Ameren. We thank our presenting sponsor, Ameren, Missouri. And this is a very special conversation with Doug Tallamy. He is the guy, in my opinion, and in many people's advocates for biodiversity like myself, to really clearly explain and motivate people why we need to use native plants, why we need to do naturescaping. Doug Tallamy has been in St. Louis a number of times, most recently in early March of 2020, made it in right before COVID-19 sequester and shutdown. And conversations that we had with Doug at that time really revealed a lot about the leadership in the kind of work that he educates about and advocates for here in the St. Louis area. So this is one of our special workshop events for the Green Living Festival. We also want to acknowledge Spire, our workshop sponsor. Doug Tallamy is a professor of entomology and urban ecology at the University of Delaware. He is the best-selling author of Bringing Nature Home, and his most recent book, his 2020 book, Nature's Best Hope. And it is my great pleasure now to get to introduce and talk to Dr. Doug Tallamy.
Okay.
Doug Tallamy, welcome back to St. Louis, sort of.
Hi, Jean. It's great to pop in.
Well, we actually thought you were going to be back here on the 29th of May at the St. Louis Community College, guest of the Horticulture Department in our Missouri Department of Conservation. But I guess that's still on hold, huh?
Yeah, I don't know if we'll reschedule that or not. The last talk I gave was March 8th, and I haven't gone anywhere since. So.
Wow. That was one day after your second talk here.
Yeah.
We were so lucky to get you. So
it is a new world.
I have to hold up the books. Bringing Nature Home. This is the big one. This is the one you want to give all your relatives. And then Nature's Best Hope. This just came out in February. Oh, get it on the screen there. Don't avoid the sunflower. And Doug Tallamy, it hit the New York Times bestseller list within like less than a week, I think, or less than 10 days.
It did, and then they ran out of books. So you have to sell a certain number each week to be on the bestseller list, and they ran out of books, and that was the end of that.
Well, and it's, that was a good problem to have, but then also you had to stop traveling and speaking and teaching and all that, and it's, people love to get to hear from you about all this, but we will. And I want to orient this conversation to reiterate the main points that you always make, but really frame that around the stuff that we're doing here in St. Louis. It was great to hear from you that we are really making this naturescaping stuff work here.
Well, yeah, I guess you appreciate it, Jean. I don't know if everybody else does, though, but, I have talked all over the country, and there are other groups doing good things. California's doing a lot of good things. Florida's doing some good things. Indiana, Michigan, Connecticut. But St. Louis is leading the way. You have so many programs, and you have had so many programs. I mean, you beat me to the punch by decades in terms of using native plants to restore ecosystem function to human-dominated landscapes. I mean, that's what it's all about. We want to design landscapes that enhance local ecosystems instead of destroy them. And very few people are doing that, but you guys are leading the way.
Why are native plants so important?
Well, it's biodiversity that's important, and you don't have it without native plants. And that's because you don't have viable food webs that support the food web, the chain of energy flow that support our birds and our mammals and everything else, unless you have insects eating plants, because most animals don't eat plants directly. They eat the insects that eat the plants. And most insects cannot eat plants that are from someplace else. So that makes it pretty simple. You've got to have the plants these insects co-evolved with, or the plants just sit there. And of course, when we design landscapes simply for aesthetics, we didn't want any insects to eat our plants. We wanted plants to have no holes and everything was perfect. And that made sense. So we chose plants that were pest-free, meaning nothing could eat them. So we had dead landscapes. The plants captured the energy from the sun and it stayed in the plants. That was the end of that. Well, when you do that in a few places, that's okay. When you do it everywhere, it's not okay. Then you have ecosystem collapse, and that's what we're looking at. That's why we have these reports of 3 billion fewer birds today than we had just 50 years ago, and insect apocalypse is here, and we're going to lose 1 million species. These are all terrible things that we can turn around primarily by changing the way we landscape.
And one of your phrases for that is Homegrown National Park. We had a presentation when you were here in March of 4 community projects that do that. And we will reboot that presentation. We'll bring it out again for the Green Living Festival, so people will be able to watch Homegrown National Park. These are biodiversity success stories from our St. Louis area. How'd you come up with that idea, and what does that mean?
I came up with that idea one day when I was looking at the statistics about the amount of acreage in lawn. It's over 40 million acres in lawn. That's bigger than an area of New England. So I said, well, what if we cut that area of lawn in half? That would give us 20 million acres to play with. And I said, well, how big is 20 million acres? And I started to add up the acreage in our major national parks. And I could add up all of the major national parks in the lower 48 states, and it's still less than 20 million acres. So I said, gee, we can create a new national park, but it's going to be at home. It's going to be in our corporate landscape. So we'll call it Homegrown National Park. Now it's going to be scattered all over the place, but that's its value, because it is going to be in the areas that are between our established parks. So it's going to create connectivity. We're going to have viable habitat that creates our parks, that connects our parks and preserves, so that organisms can live outside of them. They're not big enough to sustain the biodiversity that we need. For example, pollinators. Everybody says, well, we need pollinators to help our agriculture. Yeah, a little bit. But we need pollinators to help all the plants. 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants are pollinated by insects. So every place we want plants, which is every place, we need diverse communities of pollinators, not just in our parks and preserves. Where's it going to happen? It's going to happen at home. It's going to happen in our yards.
So how valuable is it to put a sign out in our yard? One of our wonderful programs here comes from St. Louis Audubon. It's called Bring Conservation Home. Your book is Bringing Nature Home. I gotta always remember which are the brings. Dance with them that bring you. And you can have a certified habitat. You can put a St. Louis Audubon habitat sign out in your yard. Some people do that. It takes 2 visits. That's fine. That's nice. Is that valuable?
It's extremely valuable, because the biggest obstacle we have right now to converting the way we landscape, that's a social obstacle. It goes against established cultural norms about what our landscape should look like. They should be big lawns with a few Asian plants, and that's it. So we need to change that, and the sign gives us cultural permission. It says, look, I've got a goal here. I am trying to help the local butterflies. I'm trying to help the birds. And when people think, okay, you're using different plants, you're not just abandoning your landscape, there's a real goal here. All of a sudden it's okay. So that sign gives you permission, and it also advertises what you're doing, and then other people want to do the same thing. So studies have shown that those types of signs are very important.
And we saw little mushrooming of that, to use a fungal analogy. Back, I think it was 2015. It was the 250th anniversary of the founding of the city of St. Louis. We had our Milkweeds for Monarchs, St. Louis Butterfly Project started there. The idea was, let's get 250 gardens in our city that have milkweed so that we can help restore monarch habitat. And people just went for that like crazy. And then in St. Louis County, we had Project Pollinator popped up, and there were native plants available through Grow Native, our native plant program. People still really, really love this. And I am aware that as a species, we like de novo. We like the new thing over and over and over again. Are there ways, is it important to refresh that kind of a movement from time to time?
Well, we are so isolated and separated from nature now. Seeing a butterfly is now a new thing. So reattaching ourselves but attaching for the first time our kids, exposing them to the wonders of nature right in your yard. That's a new thing. It's very exciting to a lot of people. I am finding that the timing is right. People are ready for this. So we've reached a threshold where people are getting sick and tired of hearing all the terrible news about our environment. They want to do something, but they want to do something where they can see results.
Mm-hmm.
Plant that oak tree in your yard, you see results. Plant those pollinator gardens, you see results immediately. And so in that sense, it's reinforcing itself, and it really is taking off.
So would you care to share any other things that you've observed or you've interacted with about St. Louis, about some of the things that we're doing good here in this regard? Doug Tallamy. Talking with Doug Tallamy. He is a national expert, a major guy advocating for ecological landscaping and native plants. You talk to anybody who works in the native plant area and they will quote Doug Tallamy probably in the second sentence. So.
Well, you know, the special thing about St. Louis is the number of different programs and the number of backers for these programs that you have established or still establishing, and the fact that some of them are decades old, like your St. Louis Audubon bringing conservation home, which is now expanded outside of Missouri. It's in Illinois as well. You've got over 1,000 homes registered, over 500 acres in this conservation program. Biodiversity, St. Louis, I love that term. You know, that's over 100 organizations all working together to reconnect people with nature, and naturescaping, using native plants, is a major way that they're doing that. You have wonderful storm water management programs. You know, it rains, and particularly on those big lawns, it all runs off, takes our fertilizer and our pesticides with it. So establishing rain gardens and simply more plants in our landscapes manages our watershed. And you've got programs encouraging people to do that. You know, Missouri, I don't know if it's the only state, but it's certainly one of the first to have a sales tax, a conservation sales tax that has enabled you to do wonderful conservation things. I wish every state in the union did that. And it was an early funder of a program called Grow Native way back in the 90s.
From our Missouri Department of Conservation, yes, which
right.
is the state agency that oversees fish, forests, and wildlife, and bugs come in there.
Right, which is now expanded to what, Kansas and on the west?
Illinois. On the east.
Illinois in the east, Kansas. Yes. I got to look at my map here.
And that happened. That was like it was kind of like, you know, a parent grew this program. The conservation department grew this program, Grow Native. And I used to go to national recycling conferences all over the country because that was a big part of my professional specialization. But we'd go on field trips to places, and I'd always learn about native plant programs and ecological plant programs too. And then compare Grow Native to those. I think we have one of the best, if not the best, native plant programs in the country. It was started with tax dollars. It supported growers of plants and collectors and distributors of seeds. It worked with agricultural interests to get farmers to plant, you know, fence rows and things like that. In the earlier days, that doesn't happen so much now. Unfortunately, needs to again. And then when the program got mature enough, the Conservation Department looked for another home for it, and the Missouri Prairie Foundation, which is a nonprofit, stepped up and took over Grow Native. And that's why Grow Native is now working on the Illinois side and the Kansas side of our regions respectively, because it's no longer state tax supported. But the work was done. The seed was grown. The transplant made it out and is doing really, really good. And you see those purple tags on plants or purple pots or the native plant areas in the garden center painted purple, and you can just go right to the natives.
Well, the other thing that your decades of involvement here has provided is the plants themselves. Your locally owned private garden centers, they're stocking native plants. So that's a major obstacle in a lot of places in the country. People can't get the plants that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So that's a major plus in the St. Louis area.
Doug, tell me, why won't big box stores or chain garden centers sell native plants?
Ignorance. The market, they sold what sold. And really, it wasn't long ago where the only reason you bought a plant is because it was pretty. So native had nothing to do with it. But you know, Audubon has started a brand new program with, I think it's Home Depot, one of the big box stores, where they have 3 or 4 native trees that they are pushing. I'm sorry I don't have the details, but it's starting to change, and Audubon has spearheaded that. I know white oak is one of them. So that's great. That's great news.
That's great. So that would say to me that there are some species of plants, maybe some species of trees that are appropriate enough to grow all over the country that a national chain, or maybe they're doing things regionally. Maybe they're having some regional sale and distribution.
I
That'd
don't know enough about it. There's certainly genera grown all over the country, like oaks, but it is important to grow the species that belong in your area. That we don't want to send things all over the country. So
you said at the very beginning of our conversation, Doug, plants are still taking energy from the sun. They're still producing oxygen. They're still producing food. But then who eats the plants? And I did this little drawing in my notes as you were talking of the food chain. And I'm thinking, bugs. We got to get more bugs up there in the food chain. But people get excited by bugs. They like looking at bugs.
Well, we've also found with our research, it's not just any bug. It's caterpillars that are the primary eaters of plants that move energy to other organisms. So, you know, that little chickadee in your yard wants to feed its babies. Well, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to make a clutch of chickadees. And that's one species, one tiny bird. If you want a variety of birds in your yard, think of the number of caterpillars that your plants need to make. So it's not the aphids on your garden plants or the beetles on the ground, it's those caterpillars. So we're looking at the plants that are best at making caterpillars, and there's a huge variation. Some are really, really good at it. Most aren't so good at it. So we've got to focus on the ones that are really, really good at it. I've been calling them keystone plants, you want to use, well, things like oaks. Oaks are the primary keystone plant in 84% of the counties of the US. It's why I talk about them so much. Where I live, there are 557 species of caterpillars that eat oaks. So compare that to tulip trees, another good native tree, but there's only 21 that eat that. Compare that to ginkgo, tree from China, 0.
Yeah.
Zelkova, 0. Crepe myrtle, 0. English ivy, 0. This is why we can't focus on these non-native plants, because they're not participating in the local food web. Your poor chickadee will starve if all you have is a boxwood in your yard.
How important do you think it is, Doug Tallamy, that we have regulations, best practices addressing this kind of stuff at a municipal level? We have just a handful of municipalities have a native plant ordinance, or something that is maybe a little bit more proactive than, say, a weed ordinance, a noxious weed ordinance on the books. Is that something that we should be working on more?
Well, there's 2 things there. Invasive plants, many of the plants we sell in the garden centers, like calorie pear, Bradford pear, terribly invasive. They don't stay in your yard, and they denigrate the quality of your local ecosystem. So I think of them as ecological tumors, and it's just not all right to be planting tumors everywhere. So we need regulations to stop that. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. On the other hand, we have to be careful about top-down regulations, because we know people hate that. We don't, it's much better to change the marketplace where people say, I want to buy this plant, I want to buy this native plant. And if enough people do that, the nurseries will carry it. And if they stop buying the plants that aren't doing anything ecologically, then they'll fall off in sales. So I think we need a combination of both. We need a more informed public that is going to create a market for these plants. You know, a nurseryman is a businessman. He wants to sell plants. He doesn't care which plants, as long as there's a market. But he doesn't want to stock a whole bunch of plants that nobody's going to buy. So we have to give people good reasons to buy these plants. We have to create a market for it, and then the nursery industry will respond. And I'm seeing it; they are responding right now. Well, the native plant sales are through the roof.
Good. This is good, and that's certainly been a great benefit for our locally owned garden centers. And it's been a really great benefit for the landscaping companies, the companies in the green industry that have made a specialization of designing and installing and maintaining ecological landscapes. both for individual property owners and for corporate campuses and for municipalities. I just had a conversation the other day with one of our exhibitors for this Green Living Festival, St. Louis Community College, the Merrimack campus, the horticulture program. Their enrollment is sky high, and that really went through the roof when they started emphasizing ecological landscaping. And something like over 80% of their graduates get jobs or have jobs before they complete a 2-year program.
I believe it. That is a huge empty niche nationwide. Those people will have a job anywhere they want, because wherever I go, people say, oh, I want to do what you're saying. Who can I hire? And I say, I have no idea who you can hire. So it is great to hear that. I wish every city had programs like that. So it's another wonderful thing St. Louis is doing.
And it's very affordable. You're talking about a 2-year college. You're talking about, something that young people can actually invest in without going broke. I have to give a shout out, Doug, and you probably would do this too if you had, if we had talked a little bit further in advance, to groups like Wild Ones, our
Yes.
St. Louis chapter of Wild Ones,
Yes.
and our Missouri Master Naturalist chapters. These are folks that are passionate about ecological landscaping. We've had plant sales, we've got yard tours, we've got yard makeover contests that Wild Ones put on every year. The power, say a little bit about the power of individuals, talking to our neighbors, talking to one another about spreading this.
Yeah. The best way to spread it is to provide good models. So if you say, okay, I'm going to buy into this idea, and you create a great landscape at your house that not only is an ecological role model, it's aesthetically pleasing. So people say, look, I can do this. I'm not going to be drummed out of my neighborhood. That's what we need the most. And Wild Ones, of course, has led the way. I always forget to mention them, which is crazy because I'm on their advisory board, but they've been doing it for decades. Again, another group that got the message early on. And they're not just in Missouri, they're throughout the Midwest and all the way to the East, and still expanding. So it's another example of how this idea, we're reaching a threshold where I really do see a cultural shift coming, where in the not too distant future, the homeowner who doesn't do this is going to be the outlier, as opposed to the other way around. And that's going to be a good day. We can do a dance that day, Jean.
So it'll be the teeny tiny little circle of green carpet, kind of like when you give a TED talk, you have to stand on that red carpet.
Right.
You can stand on that and wave to your neighbors with all of your coreopsis and asters and goldenrods and stuff blooming around you. Doug, I'm curious to know what you've been thinking over these months of sequester, when one of the things humans could do was go out in nature. And we had that incredible prompt to be outdoors and, maybe take photos with our iNaturalist on our phones and identify things, and say a little bit about what you've been thinking about and what you've been seeing during this time about that.
I've been thinking about Homegrown National Park and thinking about the benefits. Homegrown National Park is not closed, and it doesn't cost anything. And you can walk outside anytime and make a personal connection with nature on your own, at your own pace, on your own time, whenever it's convenient. None of those things can happen in a real national park. It's not that they don't have value, but we need to learn to look at the small things. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful nature out there that is not Angel Falls in Yellowstone or wherever that is, Yosemite. Little things that are happening. You need to train your eye a little bit, but that's what I've been thinking about the last several months is how wonderful it would be if everybody had the ability to escape to a small natural area in their yard.
And one of the things that our biodiversity leadership team, again, this comes from a number of organizations, we're looking at ways to make that more equitable, to be able to evaluate how far people have to go to get to green space, and also we need to have more dialogues with people that may not feel comfortable going outside and being around bugs, and saying, what would you like? What do you need? Hey, let me introduce you to my friend the caterpillar here, and have that be more of a relational dynamic. That's part of the social justice component of this that clearly also needs to be addressed.
And I want to get the media active in this too, because right now the only thing the media talks about from nature's perspective is how terrible it is. They demonize it at every stretch. If you go outside, a cougar's going to eat you. You're going to get West Nile virus. Something's going to kill you. So please don't go outside. I mean, that's the worst message. Now the murder hornets are here. You know, they're all going to murder us. So there's so many wonderful things that they could be talking about that I wish they would start.
Well, this is one reason it's such a pleasure to get to have this conversation with you, Doug Tallamy, for the Green Living Festival from the Missouri Botanical Garden, because, you know, the multiple times you've been here and you've met with people and talked with people and you've been in our day-long workshops, and you got to be in a workshop. Thank you for doing that with community leaders, with land management professionals when you were here in March, getting to sort of see and hear what's on people's minds and validate. We need that validation, saying that, yes, we are doing a good job and we can do more of it, and this is good.
You are doing a wonderful job. Keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you. Quick question for you, Doug. You mentioned lighting, that we need to change our outdoor lighting so it doesn't disturb bugs. What do we need to change that to?
Yeah, I taught insect ecology this semester, and I gave them a writing assignment. It was to look at the impact of light pollution on insects. Is it playing a role in global decline? And they did a real good job. They came back, it is much worse than I thought it was, that's hard to do. I think things are bad. Look at the night sky is taken from the space shuttle of the US. Everything is lit up. Well, in all of those places, we're killing insects. There are 8 different ways that light pollution kills insects, from outright incinerating them, to exhausting them, to increasing predation, to blinding them, to making them lay their eggs in the wrong place. So when you have a light on all the time, there are several things you can do. You're probably going to say, well, this is a security light. I have to have it on so the bad man doesn't come. Okay, put a motion sensor on it so it only turns on when the bad man comes. And the first thing you will notice is how often the bad man does not come. But if you don't want to do that, put a yellow bulb in it. Yellow bulbs are far less attractive to insects. And the least attractive is a yellow LED bulb. Not only would you literally save billions of insect lives every summer, but you save a lot of energy too. I mean, this is again a no-brainer in terms of climate change. This is a climate change issue, but we need to reduce the amount of light pollution, not just because it hurts the stargazers, the dark sky initiative, but it is a major contributor to global insect declines. And remember, E.O. Wilson told us insects are the little things that run the world. Without them, the world's not going to run, and that includes humans. So it's a serious issue that everybody very cheaply can address.
And my last question for you, Doug, telling me that I'm going to let you go. How well is tracking happening of insect populations? Monarch tagging gave a little bit of feedback, you know, and it might have been just a blip, not necessarily a trend, to increases in monarch populations after somewhat national, you know, gardening for monarchs, milkweeds for monarchs. How well are the systems in place to be able to tell us that we're making progress?
Very poorly, Jean, I'm sorry to say. Monarchs are actually easy because they all go to the same place in the wintertime, and we can go down and count them. You can count the area that is covered by overwintering monarchs, and that's an index of how well they're doing. But almost no other insect does that. The assumption is based on observations from citizen scientists turn out to be really important here. iNaturalist reports and things are telling us that our native bees are all in decline. But tracking insect populations is not easy. They're little. First of all, they naturally vary a lot over the years. So you need to track them a long time to detect real trends. Because variation in populations is huge naturally. So it is a big problem, but we know that it's all correlated with habitat loss. And every time we build a new home or a corporate landscape or pave a new road where there's nothing there except lawn, you've just wrecked habitat. So wherever we recreate habitat, wherever we restore it, the insects are going to come back. So whether you monitor them or not, it's going to depend on the restoration of viable habitats, which can't happen without native plants.
Native plants, insects, humans, a potential love
Connected.
story.
They're all connected.
They're all connected. Doug Tallamy, professor of entomology and urban ecology at University of Delaware and author of, here they are again, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. Can we, is it going to go back into print? Nature's Best Hope?
Oh yeah,
Good.
we now have books. It
Good.
just was a like an 8-week period right after it hit the New York Times when there were no books.
What I always say about Bringing Nature Home, this is so brilliant, Doug, because first of all, you're such a good writer, you're such a good communicator, and the first third of the book is the kind of thing that we've been talking about. Then you've got a third about insects and you got a third about trees, so it's like ideal bathroom reading. Have you heard that before?
Wherever you want to read it, that's fine.
Thank you for keeping up your good work. We look forward to the time when we can have you back here in person. And however you are traveling or speaking or writing, I know you're giving it your all. Stay safe, stay well. Doug Tallamy, thanks for giving a shout out to St. Louis here today.
Thank you, Jean.
In the St. Louis area, you can see native plants in so many places. The Whitmire Wildflower Garden at Shaw Nature Reserve, City Garden in downtown St. Louis, that is all native plants. It's a very formal planted landscape. You might not think that's native plants, but it is. That's habitat there full of high-end art. Many of our park systems, the Webster Groves Parks Department, the Kirkwood Parks, the areas in parks in the city of St. Louis, and more, as it was great to hear from a guy like Doug Tallamy, on our corporate campuses, on our educational campuses, in and around our schools, native plants are increasingly popping up thanks to the efforts of humans like us, who are understanding the connection between living things and honoring that connection and working to restore that connection. Thank you for viewing this special presentation from the 19th Annual Green Living Festival, coming to you from the Earthway Center of Missouri Botanical Garden. Many partners combining to bring an event like this to you virtually. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Ameren. And among our exhibitors, you can hear about people learning to be ecological landscapers from St. Louis Community College, Merrimack campus. You can hear about planting trees from Forest Keeling Nursery. Be sure to tune in to and view at your leisure the events from June 9th, our Naturescaping Day, including the Homegrown National Park panel of local examples of the kind of thing that Doug Tallamy was talking about. Thanks to all the partners who are working to make ecological landscaping and human, insect, plant, bird relationships a much healthier reality. Thanks for viewing. Check out native plants. They're really fun. They will grow on you.